Shedeur Sanders just turned the entire Atlanta Falcons playbook upside down in one shocking move. And trust me, absolutely nobody saw this coming.
Head coach Kevin Stefanski just joined Dan Patrick's show in regards to his podcast, speaking out about Shedeur Sanders along with Dylan Gabriel. And he had a lot of interesting things to say about both quarterbacks. I'm going to play this video clip so you guys can hear exactly what he had to say. You guys know I like to get right to it, so let's get this train rolling.
Press conference, your introductory press conference. I know you didn't want to talk about the Cleveland Browns.
We thought this day would never come. We thought Kevin Stefanski was too stubborn, too arrogant, and too set in his ways to ever admit the truth. But moments ago, the unthinkable happened. Kevin Stefanski didn't just name Shedeur Sanders the starter. He stood in front of the team and apologized. He admitted that he held the kid back. He admitted the game plans were wrong. And he officially handed the keys to the entire franchise to Shedeur Sanders.
I think a lot of people are taking something away from what Shedeur said about Kevin Stefanski getting fired, though.
I don't know that a lot of people are, but I am, and I think that's why it's funny to me. Is that I'm like, is everyone else picking up what I'm hearing in that, and the idea that people wanted this big, grandiose? I don't know what they wanted. Did people want him to do what Shelby Harris did, where he basically cried at the locker?
Said he was the best coach he's ever had.
Yeah, like, did you want a DeJuan Jones type situation? Like, legitimately, his answer is things are gonna happen.
Kevin Stefanski, a coach with more than 20 years of NFL experience, found himself in a situation he probably never imagined. Sitting face-to-face with Shedeur Sanders under bright lights, in front of cameras, front office power players, and team ownership, delivering a public apology. Not behind closed doors, not filtered through a PR statement, live for everyone to see. And here's the twist you won't believe. The person who forced that moment wasn't the commissioner, wasn't the players' union, and wasn't some viral social media storm. It was the owner of the Atlanta Falcons who stepped into the building, saw what was unfolding with his franchise quarterback, and decided he'd had enough. The entire room went ice cold the second Stefanski began to speak. And what Shedeur did after hearing that apology, no one in that building was ready for it. Not a single person across the NFL saw it coming. And that right there is the exact reason this young quarterback is wired differently from everyone else at his position.
I love those two young guys, and they'll continue to improve.
Absolutely, Shedeur Sanders will continue to improve much better than what he did under Kevin Stefanski, simply because Kevin Stefanski did not want Shedeur Sanders. He wanted Dylan Gabriel. Todd Monken wants Shedeur Sanders. For all my former athletes out there, they can tell you guys it's a difference.
Is Shedeur Sanders your starter now for the rest of the season?
Yes.
Okay. And what is your thinking behind that?
I think all along, Mary Kay, as you know, with our quarterbacks and our young players, you're always making sure that you're making the right decisions for our guys. And I think he has constantly and consistently gotten better in each one of these games and how he's approached this game. He's been working very hard, so I feel good about where his development is heading. He knows.
All right, listen up. Welcome back. And before we even touch the details of this story, you need to lock in on one thing. What went down inside the Atlanta Falcons facility this week isn't just about Shedeur Sanders. It's bigger than coaching staff tension. It's not just another episode in the longest underdog storyline the modern NFL has ever seen. What happened this week marks a real shift in the power balance between players and coaches in professional football. And Shedeur Sanders, without throwing a pass, without hosting a press conference, without typing a single post, is exactly why it happened. So let's rewind and build this properly, because the apology, as shocking and unprecedented as it felt, was actually the final scene of a story that started weeks earlier. You can't truly understand what exploded inside that conference room without seeing the chain reaction that led there. Think back to when the Falcons first made their move to seriously pursue Shedeur Sanders. The franchise needed a quarterback. They had cap flexibility. They had ownership desperate to make a statement and transform this team into a legitimate year-after-year contender. And once Shedeur's name became a real target, a young quarterback with elite arm talent, sharp football intelligence, and that ice-cold clutch gene you can't teach, Atlanta didn't hesitate. They went big. $200 million on the table, the kind of number that trends before the contract is even signed. But here's the part you won't believe. Shedeur Sanders attached one condition to a signature, and that condition had a name: Kevin Stefanski. Now, for anyone who needs the full backstory, Stefanski arrived in Atlanta carrying a complicated resume from his time with the Cleveland Browns. Sharp tactician, structured, system-driven. But there were documented whispers from players and insiders questioning whether he truly connected with his quarterbacks, whether he adjusted when his signal caller challenged a scheme that clearly wasn't working, whether his philosophy elevated elite football IQ or quietly boxed it in. While the coordinator structure stayed shielded, Browns owner Jimmy Haslam was one of the first to notice. Jimmy Haslam saw something in Shedeur Sanders that Kevin Stefanski failed to recognize early, and he wasn't about to let his head coach brush it aside. Haslam started pressing Stefanski to name Shedeur the starter, and it didn't take long for that pressure to boil over. Even though Stefanski had his doubts, Haslam made one thing undeniable. Shedeur was the future. Shedeur knew it, he felt it, and he wasn't about to ink a $200 million deal just to step into the same situation dressed in new colors. So when the Atlanta Falcons returned to negotiations and Shedeur's stance hadn't shifted, when it became obvious this wasn't posturing but a firm boundary, Falcons ownership started watching their own building very carefully. And what they uncovered when they began asking hard questions caught them off guard. Because here's what sources say ownership found once they peeled back the layers of this situation. The tension between Shedeur and Stefanski wasn't simply about scheme fits or play-calling preferences. There were private conversations, the kind that are never supposed to leak, where Stefanski reportedly questioned Shedeur's readiness, his temperament, even whether his personality was too strong for a so-called team-first culture. And when those remarks circled back to Shedeur's camp through the quiet back channels that always exist inside NFL organizations, they didn't just sting, they detonated. Think about that for a second. You're a 22-year-old quarterback who just put out film so impressive it had serious football minds across the country leaning forward in their seats. You made it through one of the most dissected draft processes the NFL has ever seen. You absorbed hits that should have drawn flags, endured media storylines designed to rattle you, survived an entire culture of doubt and dismissal, and somehow you came out the other side looking exactly like you promised, a legitimate starting NFL quarterback. And now the very head coach tasked with elevating you, sharpening you, building the system that lets your talent explode, is behind closed doors questioning your character, your readiness, quietly planting uncertainty in conversations with ownership and executives. That's not a football disagreement. That's a fracture in the core trust that must exist between a head coach and a franchise quarterback. And when the Atlanta Falcons owner finally saw the full puzzle, when the dots connected and the timeline made sense, he didn't schedule a press conference. He didn't issue some polished statement. He walked straight into the building, called everyone in, and made one thing crystal clear to Kevin Stefanski. This gets fixed face to face, right now.
So, well, Dad, I would tell you I have zero ill will towards anyone in that building. Dee and Jimmy Haslam treated me unbelievably, treated my family unbelievably. So I have no ill will towards all those type of things. As it relates to decisions like that, it's not fair for me to comment. Those two young players, I love those guys. I loved coaching them. I love their development. As a coach,
Now let me pause right there, because I already know some of you are in the comments saying this is too far. That an owner forcing his head coach to apologize to a player is crossing the line, that it weakens the staff and sets a risky tone for the locker room. And honestly, in a vacuum, I understand that reaction. When ownership steps in and orders a head coach to apologize, it absolutely raises eyebrows about leadership structure inside an NFL franchise. But this situation was never happening in a vacuum, and here's what that argument completely ignores. Kevin Stefanski didn't just clash with a player over X's and O's. He privately undercut his own franchise quarterback, the same player the Atlanta Falcons just committed $200 million to, the same player ownership publicly identified as the foundation of their future. And he did it in a way that could have permanently damaged that relationship before a single regular season snap was played. That's not strategy. That's a full-blown organizational emergency. And the owner treated it exactly like one. But hold on, because this is where the story flips completely, and you won't believe what happened next. The apology went down. Stefanski sat directly across from Shedeur Sanders, with ownership and selected executives in the room, and delivered it. Sources say it wasn't some short, polished PR script. It was thorough. It was pointed. It addressed the exact remarks that were made, the exact setting they were made in, and why those comments crossed the line for a head coach speaking about his starting quarterback. The room didn't make a sound the entire time, and when Stefanski finished, when the final word hung in the air and the silence turned heavy, every single person shifted their eyes to Shedeur Sanders, because this was his stage. This was the moment for a 22-year-old who had been doubted, questioned, quietly undermined at every level to finally unload. He could have let 2 years of frustration spill out right there with ownership watching and cameras ready. And do you know what Shedeur Sanders did? He nodded. He locked eyes with Stefanski. He said, "I hear you." And then he dropped a line nobody in that room was prepared for. He said, "Now let's go win." If Jimmy Haslam had decided to fire Stefanski, nobody would have been confused about why. The perception was clear. Undermine the franchise quarterback and you're playing with fire. Jimmy Haslam read the situation perfectly. Now that Shedeur Sanders is the starter, his rise is directly tied to Kevin Stefanski's job security. If Shedeur thrives, Stefanski survives. If he stumbles, Stefanski's gone. And let's be real, handing Shedeur the keys to the franchise was never just about football. Sit with that for a second, because those 3 words, calm, controlled, no theatrics, told you more about who Shedeur Sanders is than any hot take we've heard over the last 2 years. He had every reason to make that moment personal. Every emotional receipt was there to cash in, and nobody would have criticized him for it. Ownership was in the room, cameras were rolling, the spotlight was his. And instead of looking backward, he chose forward. That's not diva energy, that's not entitlement, that's leadership. That's a 22-year-old understanding the mission outweighs the moment, that winning hits harder than revenge, that the loudest response to doubt is dominance on Sundays. Now think about what this does to the culture inside the Atlanta Falcons moving forward, because something shifted in that room and you can feel it. Ownership just showed the entire locker room they will protect their investment. Stefanski got a second chance that, if handled right, could reshape him as a coach. And Shedeur Sanders, without yelling, without leaking to the media, without doing anything except standing firm and then choosing grace when he had every reason to choose fire, just became the unquestioned leader of that franchise overnight. Before training camp, before preseason, the serious quarterback competition talk, it got real quiet after this week. Because you don't walk through a storm like that and come out composed unless the building believes in you. The players saw it, the staff saw it, the front office saw it, and ownership, the people who signed the checks and defined the standard inside the Atlanta Falcons, they saw exactly who their quarterback is when everything is on the line.